Welcome, believers. Welcome, conspiracy theorists. Welcome to the wonderfully weird world of the Tinfoil Hat Fan Club, where we talk about all the batshit crazy stuff that goes on in the world, and there is loads. Today, I want to carry on the alien abduction theme that I've been doing. Okay, now we spoke about Geraldine Orozco. Okay, she did a website called Hybrid Mother, well worth checking out. We spoke about Terry Matthews and her abduction story. We talked about Terry Lovelace, the abduction case while he was out camping. That's a very famous one, that is. We spoke about the Allagash incident, 4 young fishermen abducted on the Allagash River. Okay, check that out. That's quite interesting. We've just done the Jenny Henderson case, okay, and we did that in 2 sections. So now I want to tell you the story of a woman called Denise Stoner, okay? So stay tuned and I'll tell you all about it. Right then, welcome back, believers. Denise Stoner then. Right, what perhaps makes the claim of alien abduction by Denise Stoner, abductions that have occurred since childhood no less, is that she herself is one of the leading UFO and extraterrestrial encounter investigators in the states of Florida in the United States. So she ended up working for MUFON. Now, Stoner underwent 2 Pacific abduction encounters that both involved her husband, the first of which took place while on the way to their country retreat while living in Colorado with her husband and teenage daughter in the summer of 1982. A second encounter unfolded just short of a decade later following a move to Florida, suggesting that rather than having been in the wrong place at the wrong time with the first one, the Stoners, or at least Denise, was very much targeted for their harrowing abductions. So the aliens seemed to know exactly where she was. Now, much of the information that was retrieved about this story comes from UFO Insight, okay? And they got it from a woman called Kathleen Murden. Now, she wrote a book called The Alien Abductions, and she's a very well-known hypnotic regression sessionalist. So please check out The Alien Abductions by Kathleen Murden, because I might buy it. And also check out UFO Insight. It's a fantastic website. I paid like 20 quid for a year's membership, and it is well worth it, okay? Now, Denise Stoner relayed that her first memory of alien abductions was when she was 2.5 years old, while she was at home in Hartford, West Virginia. On that particular evening, Stoner's mother was in the hospital about to give birth to Denise's sister, and she was being cared for by her grandfather. Now, she clearly recalls looking out of a window at the house and seeing an object she would describe as egg-shaped, prompting her to ask her grandfather why Humpty Dumpty was in the sky. According to her memory, her grandfather suddenly had a look of fear wash over him as he noticed the object she had pointed out. At that point, he seemingly changed the subject and informed her that it was bedtime. Now, however, this was just the start of the evening's strange and unsettling events. Now, as she lay in her bed, a bizarre entity suddenly appeared as it walked right through the wall. Now, we should note this is a detail of entities appearing through walls is found in many other similar encounters. She would claim to the Boston Globe that the entity looked like a monk, he had a robe and was carrying a light. The entity held its hands out towards her for her to take it. Now, as she felt no fear, she did so. And so they proceeded to walk into the hallway because, let's face it, kids are so trusting. 2.5 years old, you're not going to think anything, are you? You haven't got that inbuilt fear that you get as your adults. Now, the figure lifted the light it was carrying and pointed it directly at the wall and then walked into it and disappeared. The next thing she knew, she was inside a large dome-shaped room and there were lots of other children around her. Now, although she couldn't recall what, it appeared that they were learning something from the strange host. Once more, now this is an intriguing detail, that people simply find themselves inside these strange rooms, presumably a UFO, but don't recall actually physically entering them. Now, that appears loads of times, that does. So they remember going towards the vehicle and then they remember being in it, but they never remember actually boarding the craft. Now, Stoner's next memory is that it was morning and she was waking up in bed. Okay, so a 2.5-year-old, this is her first abduction case. Now, Stoner would state since that incident, she has been abducted by the same alien entity more than 50 times. And these abductions can happen anywhere, from a home while driving and even while walking along the street. Stoner would state that there's no friendship. He comes to get me and I know I'm going to be safe. Adding that he's also going to oversee whatever is done. She would describe this entity as your typical grey alien, although he was one of the tall ones. What's interesting, isn't it? So he's obviously taller than the normal grey. Now, Marden would initially concentrate on an incident that happened to the entire Stoner family on the evening of the 13th of August 1982 as they were on their way to a vacation retreat at the Grace Acre Ranch just outside of Denver, Colorado. Now, they had arranged to meet Denise's parents as well as a family friend at the retreat, and they were going to get there for about 8:30. They would ultimately arrive much later than that. Now, with Dennis was her husband Ed and their teenage daughter Deanna, as well as the family dog. They had left Denver around 5 p.m. and immediately took to the back roads in order to escape the rush hour traffic. Now, by 6:30 p.m., they had arrived at Kenosha Pass. Now, Kenosha Pass, because I'm British, I don't know where that is, so I'm going to stick it up. Okay, now you can picture the incident, all right? That is Kenosha Pass, which not only gave Ed a chance to pull over and stretch his legs, but also offered fantastic views of the South Park Valley below. There it is. It was after Ed restarted the car and set off down the Kenosha Pass that the evening took a bit of a weird turn. Now, while Denise and Ed chatted as they drove towards Jefferson, Deanna slept in the back. It was as they passed through Jefferson's that Denise noted 2 yellow white lights in the sky. Now, what's more, they appeared to be increasing in size and heading in their direction. Now, they eventually were directly over the top of the moving vehicle. Now, that would freak you out alone, wouldn't it? Now, honestly, I have seen a UFO, and I have had one buzz my car. I know it sounds mad. But it is true, and it is quite freaky, and it literally lit my whole car up. Sorry, I'm digressing, okay? While Denise and Ed chat, now I've done that, then, without warning, the car suddenly moved sideways off the road and into the desert floor. The same as the Terry Matthews abduction, if you watched it. It was as if it was being dragged by some kind of invisible rope, and they could do nothing at all to resist the pull, as if the car was very much under the control of someone else. All the while, the lights remained directly overhead of their car. Now, the next thing Denise and Ed realised, they were out of the valley entirely and were driving towards Trout Creek Pass. What's more, it was no longer daylight, as it had only been seconds earlier. The sky was now dark and it was almost 11 p.m. Now, Ed quickly calculated that they had covered almost 40 miles with no memory and they had lost almost 4 hours. Missing time, eh? Very prominent for all cases, missing time. Now, even stranger, despite them being 40 miles from their previous location when the lights had arrived, the tripometer had not registered those miles. It was as if they had been picked up and placed 40 miles down the road and set back on their way. And I think that's exactly what happened to them. Okay, I reckon that UFO picked the car up and then dropped it off. I bet if they checked the fuel as well, none's gone. Now, by the time they arrived at their destination, it was only 15 minutes before midnight, so now it's 11:45. What's more, Denise's parents and their family and friends were at the roadside of the retreat with a mixture of anxiety and relief on their faces, so they were obviously panicky about them. They would tell them that they were thinking of calling the police and filing a missing persons report. Now, deciding that they had no other option due to the truly bizarre situation, they opted to tell their worried family exactly what had happened. Although they initially suspected the story was some kind of bizarre, fake fairy tale story, they eventually realised how serious they were. Now, following the weekend away, the Stoners returned home to Denver, and although it would be almost 3 decades before Denise would speak of the incident, she would often find herself contemplating just what did happen that evening. Now, by the time Marden met with Denise Stoner, she and the family had moved to Florida, and she was now state section director and chief investigator for MUFON. She would ultimately agree to investigate the case, as well as hypnotically regressing Denise in order to unlock some of the memories of that evening in question. So Denise Stoner's story must have been good enough for Marden to believe and to investigate. I mean, she does. She is the chief investigator for MUFON after all. Now, Marden agreed to hypnotically regress Denise, with their first session taking place on the 7th of July 2011, and would prove to be fascinating and revealing in equal measures. She would take Denise back to the night of the 13th of August 1982, as she and her family were travelling to meet her parents for a weekend away. So she is now being regressed back to that night in 1982. She would soon recall the strange lights she had noticed in the sky coming towards them. She would state under hypnosis that there were 3 big lights off in the valley, and they are coming down the valley floor. She also said they don't look right because there's no roads out there. When Marden asked Denise to describe the lights further, she responded that they are huge, bright and white, and they seem to be rotating slowly. She would further state that they were attached to another object that appeared to look like 2 convex mirrors. Now, the lights were directly over the top of their vehicle. At this point, the car began to move sideways. She recalled instinctively looking in the back seat to see if their daughter was awake from the sudden movement, but she remained asleep. The next thing she knew, she was outside in the valley under the craft. The lights had now separated from the craft and come down to the ground. This is all under hypnosis, by the way. She recalled that she was supposed to go into the centre of the lights. She sensed that there was someone else there, but she couldn't see them. Now, an already bizarre and unnerving situation took another drastic turn. Several minutes later, a glob of clear, lighted, jelly-like substance, like the size of 2 of my heads, she said, maybe floated towards Denise. She's under hypnosis, all right? She looked upwards and saw a black obsidian-coloured opening that was shaped like an hourglass. She also noted how the object that she described specifically as a craft was now much lower to the ground. So she would continue that she said, I had to step into the jail. I knew I had to step into the jail, but that she was very much afraid to do so. Now, despite these reservations, however, she stepped forward into the strange substance. As soon as she did this, she was sucked into it. She would describe a feeling like she was breaking up, like I was shattering. At this point, a voice came into her mind, assuring her she would be okay. Now, this is getting freaky, isn't it? This is rabbit hole stuff, okay? This is white rabbit stuff. Now, she could see the opening of the ship and quickly realised that the opening was too small to fit a human body through it. The next thing she heard a shh sound, and before she could contemplate what was happening, she was inside the craft, although she didn't know how. Yet again, I think she knows more about going into the craft than any other one I've come across so far. It's very well described, isn't it? Okay, right. So she recalled that the gel-like substance was now completely gone, and she was in a brushed silver room that was not bright but similar to the lightest silver titanium colour. Okay, so that is what the light gave off a silver titanium colour. Now, the lighting inside the room was dim and she couldn't see where it come from. Now, here again, we have a detail often repeated in many alien abduction encounters: no source of light. In that, although the respective rooms are lit, the abductee could not see a light bulb or a strip. Now, Denise recalled that it appeared the lighting was coming from the top of the walls of the room, but there was no bulbs, no light strips, no LEDs, nothing like that. It was just everywhere. As she looked around the room, she noticed several greys, the greys, who were simply standing there. As soon as she saw them, something in her mind told her that these were soldiers. She would describe these figures as being unclothed and without a crease or a line or a separation between the skin. I'll tell you what, I wish I had that. And appeared to be slightly more blue than grey, and were a similar colour to the walls of the room. Well, maybe the colour of the walls were reflecting on their grey skin. Now, she would estimate they were under 5 feet tall and had particularly large black eyes that had a misty quality to them. As she watched these apparent alien entities, she noticed another figure, this one much taller. It came round the corner of a curve in the room and headed towards her. Now, she noted how the figure's eyes blinked vertically. Something she noticed as it bent down towards her. When the figure's face was almost touching Denise's, it said to her that they have to go in. She would describe this tallest figure as being a little more upsetting. She would recall how his head's not attached to his shoulders in the same way, and that his eyes go straight up and down near the side of his face. Furthermore, he had no nose and a tiny red mouth. She would also recall that although he spoke, he didn't talk, almost as if he spoke directly into her mind. Another thing that occurs constantly through these abduction tales is the telepathy. Now, at this point, Dennis declared that she wanted to go back to the car. However, the creature responded that she could not go back until he had done what he had to do. Scary. What is it he's got to do? Denise was now becoming visibly anxious during the hypnotic session, so much so that Marden opted to end the session with a view to picking up at the next point. So she's talked about the alien, she's now in the ship, the hypnotic session, she has started to get anxious, so Marden's called it a day. Okay. Now, the next hypnotic regression session would take place several months later on the 26th of October 2011. However, before that took place, Denise informed Marden of several details she had managed to recall consciously since their last meeting. So this hypnotic regression must have unlocked some stuff. For example, she would claim that despite how terrifying the taller creature was to her, she could sense it was highly intelligent. She had further remembered that when the car moved sideways, it was in fact lifted several feet from the ground. She also recalled passing by a nearby ranch as they went. She couldn't recall how or why she got out of the vehicle, but she was certain that her husband and daughter and their pet dog all remained inside. So this was an abduction just for Denise. However, it was when Marden took Denise back to where they had left off where some of the most remarkable recollections came. Okay, so we are now back under the session, okay? Now, she would recall that she followed the creature into a room as instructed, noting that there were several other similar entities inside. In her head, the mechanical male voice says, "Tell her to get on a table in the middle of the room for the purpose of a test." So this is what she's hearing in her head. She did as instructed, telling Marden that the creature tears a cuff from her jeans on her right ankle so he could place a wire on top of my foot. She would describe this wire as thin and that it stings as it's placed seemingly inside one of her veins. Yet again, is that a tag? Is that a homing device? It's not unusual for these abductees to find things inside them. Okay, now the creature informed Denise that the wire will remain in place for a while, responding to Denise that it is there so that the ones on Earth will be able to recognise me or her easily before informing her that the sting and pain will cease shortly. I wonder what they meant by that. Tracking device? Now, following this, a strange instrument appeared from behind, and the creature used it to place something that feels like a piece of sand into her tear duct. The figure claimed that this would fall out in a few days. Denise would later describe this as a tiny little white bead, and it was inserted into her eye by a metal or stainless steel pinchers with a point at the end. Now, this little pincher, or little pair of tweezers, had a very high-tech look, apparently. Now, he would then take a diamond-shaped instrument and push down on her abdominal. When the instrument was passed over her ovaries, it caused a burning sensation. Denise asked what the purpose of the test was, to which the figure replied, "It was not for you to know. You are part of the whole." Now, I wonder what they meant by that. Now, under hypnotic regression, she might have got it wrong. What do they mean by you are part of the whole? Now, Denise would then go on to describe that she was somehow made to understand by the figure that he had visited with her many times before. She would also recall a strange 3D holographic type technology that displayed pictures of Earth and other faraway planets. That's strange, isn't it? Because I think we got that now. We have got that technology. Perhaps, though, it is the description of the figure that she gave that should alert us, as Marden points to the idea that as opposed to being a grey alien, the short ones, it is an insectoid or a praying mantis type extraterrestrial, because they have cropped up a few times. Now, Denise would state that the figure had a striking yellow eyes with a black centre with lines running through them. He also had 3 long fingers and 1 thumb. This is again a detail mentioned in many alien abduction encounters. By comparison to the long fingers, his palm was extremely small, so the long fingers must have looked really long and jointy. Now, Denise would further state that the figure had an oddly jointed body. He appeared to be skin and bones, and his joints looked arthritic. Around this seemingly fragile frame, he wore a dark jacket that reached down to his legs and featured a stand-up collar like a priest wears. Now, that is the first time I've ever heard of an alien wearing clothes. So, she would further describe the figure's skin as bumpy and greenish, that had a green tint to it, and in between all the bumps it was darker, right? So it had a green, bumpy complexion, but between the bumps it was dark. On the odd occasion when the figure's skin touched hers, Denise claimed it had a rough feel to it. So, look, are there many different aliens visiting the Earth? I generally think there are. I think there's loads. And, without going down that rabbit hole again, I think every alien has its own agenda. I believe some want to save the Earth. Some are worried about our treatment of the Earth. Some are worried about the ozone layer, so on and so forth. Some I wouldn't be surprised if they were watching us like we watch, I don't know, some sort of social media program on telly. Now, she also sensed that this creature could be very controlling and could be mean, could be cruel without any feelings or emotions about it. And while she didn't notice any facial expressions that she would suggest emotion of any kind, she did on several occasions pick up what appeared to be curiosity. So mean and callous and cruel, eh? What is perhaps interesting is the certainty that Denise felt about the entity being highly intelligent. Some researchers and abductee contactees have asserted that not only do these insectoid aliens exist, but they are indeed very intelligent. And while many will take these assertions with a pinch of salt, and perhaps rightly so, it does make for intriguing thinking, doesn't it? I think that they have to be intelligent anyway. I mean, they must be light years ahead of us. I mean, they do fly spaceships. Maybe that while being separate from the Greys, these insectoid aliens are working with them. Now, a third session would take place a little over a week later on the 4th of November 2011. Now, during this session, Martin managed to extract some intricate descriptions of the craft itself. Now, for example, she would speak of being in a room with its own atmosphere. She would elaborate that the room was almost in complete blackness apart from a pole that went from what we would assume to be the ceiling to the floor. She would further state that there was a mechanical device wrapped around the pole and two arms that came out of each side. Now, perhaps the most intriguing detail of this strange device in the middle of the room was a notion that it was alive, and the whole thing inside the centre block is in motion, adding it can think, it operates the craft. Now, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because my UFOs have a certain biological element to them. Following this, the figure took Denise out of the strange and disorientating room. As soon as she left the room, she felt that she had left something that was pressurised. So obviously they altered the atmosphere for her, maybe. Now, what might this say about the strange craft that contain these alien occupants? Are the craft themselves alive, as some UFO researchers have pondered previously? Might this explain such sightings that contain details of apparent solid objects changing shape and form in mid-air? Once more, it would appear that the more details we get of these strange, otherworldly encounters, the murkier and more confusion the water becomes. As we will examine next on the next one, as fascinating as this encounter undoubtedly was, another occurred on the other side of the United States, just short of a decade later. And it was there that we will turn our attention next. So, believers, what do you think? Some really white rabbit stuff. Did she really get abducted by aliens? That's the question. I will let you decide. So stay tuned for the next part next week. And thanks for watching.